I yelled it just this morning, Dredd. The car starts coming, and there's one guy in our region who I don't know why, but he doesn't just say car back, right? He goes full on car, 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 car. And I finally, because I never usually yell it, because I know, I mean, it's funny to me, but I don't usually yell it. I finally just said, there's no need to panic.
Don't panic yet.
Yeah.
Plenty of panic time.
Yeah.
But
when he's a mile and a half off.
I won't ask who it is, but
right, it's not Olaf. It's not Olaf. Although Olaf, being a very safety conscious individual, I can see why you might surmise that could have been, the possible person, but it was not. It's not him.
Olaf is personally reckless.
Yes, but
safety minded for others.
That is 100% true.
Interesting.
But he would build a rail so that you couldn't possibly fall off.
He would put a safety placard on a pebble so you won't trip over it. I mean, he put cones around it. Around a chink, just tiny little crack in his hull. But he himself,
I had never quite made that connection, but that is peak Olaf. That is hysterical. Yeah,
it's exactly what it is.
No regard for self, high regard for others.
That's right. Yeah. So runs right across the street through traffic, yelling, "Be careful! Don't no one else do this."
Right.
Okay. All right.
So he likely doesn't wear mudgear socks himself, but he would buy you a pair. Is that?
I'll tell you this. That's probably true. Yeah, that might be right on the money. He'd be like, "Look, I wear shoes made of broken glass, but you, my friend, should have a mudgear sock."
I don't think he wears socks at all.
He may not. Which is ironic because he wears a hard hat everywhere he goes, as you know.
And carries a whiteboard.
Yes, oftentimes he has been known to do that and to teach Q-source Q points. Now, one Q-source Q point that is not part of the Q-source, I don't know that it was a consideration for version 1, and I'll tell you, not likely on the product map for version 2 of Q-source, if there should ever be one. But mudgear socks are a foundational element of good foot health. And so I highly recommend, especially at this time of year when many sales, Christmas in July kinds of things and whatnot, 4th of July sales and all that sort of stuff's going on. You should kind of keep your eyes open and keep your feet safe and healthy and happy, because a mudgear sock is a good sock and life's too short to wear crappy socks.
If you're going to be a winner, you're going to need a coach.
Sharpening doesn't happen by accident. A blade left untouched will rust, and a man left unchallenged will stagnate. Every man needs friction, resistance, and a whetstone to grind away weakness and reveal his true edge. Welcome to the Whetstone, where we reject comfort, disrupt the status quo, and forge men ready for impact. Hosted by Dredd, Dark Helmet, and me, the Plague. This is where men step out of the drift and into acceleration, because iron sharpens iron, and no man sharpens alone.
And we're back.
Well, I love, so we had a really good discussion around the 4th of July on freedom. And then our latest episode was really talking about the Caddy principle. I love that imagery. I'm in a recent sort of emeritus leadership role locally within F3, and have been
your
thinking,
fake Nantan role.
Well, just thinking through, like, how am I carrying the clubs, or do I get excited when the guy who's taken over that role for me is making decisions or navigating challenges? So that was really cool to kind of think through that. One of the things that I wanted to get your guys' thoughts on, and I think there's, we talked about candor, and we've talked about giving feedback or giving advice or making decisions, but would just be curious. I think there's some opportunity to maybe dive into, how do we have healthy conflict? And I think in F3, my experience has been like, you've got all of the ingredients to do that well within the gloom, with your brothers in F3, but would just be curious what you guys, maybe your experience or maybe suggestions you would have for how we can better steward that skill within the gloom.
Fisticuffs. That is
easy answer.
And a kid should be 19 before they come out the F3. There, good. Are we done now? No more podcasts.
So I'll throw a couple of principles out there that make it work. So first of all, the idea of the after action review, right? The idea of looking back at what you just did and determining where it can be improved, what needs to be sustained, what needs to be improved, is the sign of a healthy organization. It's the sign.
I'll give you one caveat: if done regularly.
Yeah. So I'm going to get there.
Okay, go. Okay,
but your caveat is well taken. It's exactly right, because there's several caveats. So I think the general overarching principle, number one, is it is the sign of a healthy organization. It's a sign of a lizard to conduct one. Now, within that, some principles. Number one, exactly what our Nantan said: done regularly. If it's not done regularly, it won't work. So that's number one. Number two, done as soon as possible after what's being reviewed. So the AAR done a week after whatever is less effective than the one done 2 minutes afterwards. And you shouldn't sacrifice proximity and time, temporal proximity, except for, exigent circumstances. So obviously, if you're, let's say, put it into combat, because it all comes from the military. If you are in combat and you conduct a combat operation, you conduct an AR as soon as combat operation is over, but you don't stop and you don't do it before it's over when the bullets are still flying.
Yeah, I was gonna, in the middle of the firefight, be like, John, I really think you could have shot those guys a little closer.
That's right.
Not probably the time.
A third principle I believe in is it works much better from a candor standpoint if the leader begins with, where do I need to improve? What would you say I should sustain, before he says, hey, Bob? If he starts with himself and then responds maturely to criticism, regardless of whether or not it appears to be in good faith. So, if somebody says to him something that's riles him up because he thinks, look, this guy's just cut at me, and gets mad about it, well, it won't work. I mean, if you hear a comment and you think it's not in good faith, you don't think it's designed to help improve the organization, the best thing to do is be a good driver and say, yeah, I'll think about that. Thank you. But don't really take it to heart. If you aren't sure, get with your shield lock at your next opportunity or your shared leadership team and say, hey, this comment was brought up. My thought process is to dismiss it. I don't think it's well-founded. What do you think? All right. So, consistent, meaning always do it every time you can. Temporal proximity, as quickly as you possibly can. Candor, you see how we're working back the other virtues in. Candor, starting with yourself. And since candor is graciously telling the hard truth and demanding it to hear it from others, you're flipping it there. You're demanding to hear it from others. Now, when you turn it outward, say fourth principle, and you're going to say, hey, Bob, it's best to open that up to the group and the guy himself and say, with great specificity. Whereas with yourself, you might say, hey, and keep it general. But when you get to Bob, say, Bob's execution of this, something very specific. Where should he sustain? What does he need to improve? Bob, what do you think? Right? And maybe start with Bob. Bob, what do you think about your own self? And then what does everybody else think? And the leader also, whereas comments directed to him that he thinks are in bad faith, he just is a good driver.
Good driver, yeah, takes him.
But with comments directed towards someone else, no, he has to play a role there. So if a comment is out of line, you say, hey, I'm sorry, man, I don't think that's warranted under the circumstances. I think you're speaking from anger or whatever. He has to he has to take a more aggressive role there. And finally, the last principle I'm going to throw out there is you got to do something with that information. I mean, if you are engaging in a repeated activity, for instance, and you conduct an AAR, and every time you do it, the same comments come back and nothing ever happens. I mean, people are going to say, rightfully so, why are we bothering with this? I mean, it's just a check block. But, if the comment is, I'm trying to come up with a generic specific example, Bob, Bob needs to raise his voice. His commands are too soft. No one can hear him. Then the next time Bob has the cue, you might want to say to him when he's being soft, "Hey, Bob, speak up. This is what they're talking about." Give him a little,
you help him see it in context, kind of.
Yeah, you need to see it. People need to see it having effect, or they won't respect the process. They'll see it as something you're just doing because it's on a checklist. Oh, I must conduct an AAR. It doesn't really mean anything. And so I think those are the central principles of it, and as long as, and going to throw it back to you guys, throw your own principles in there. But from my perspective, what I learned in the military, what I've learned as practice in law, and what I've learned from F3, obviously, those are the principles that comprise a solid commitment to conducting AARs.
I would obviously, having done a number of these in different contexts, would certainly back up and support everything that Dredd just said, and add just a couple of things, just for clarity as it relates specifically to F3, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe it's not specific, but you could generalize it. But I would add that, kind of one principle I have found that is useful, and I think it's because preparedness is one of our very first foundational principles.
Mm-hmm.
When you were taking on the role of a leader, oh, and by the way, you were born, so guess what? You took it on, whether you liked it or not. Right? It's yours. Now you can put it down if you want, but so in as much as you are a leader, you have to think forward as well, and you must be prepared. And here's some ways that I think it is helpful to be prepared to be able to do just what Dredd described. The day you know that you're a leader, which again, I'm being a little sarcastic and beating it to death here, but it's today, right? Chances are good somewhere in the future, you're bound to have a tough conversation with somebody. Mm-hmm. You may or may not even know who that's going to be. So I tend to think of, and I think it was Stephen Covey who kind of talked about this, of making deposits in men's emotional bank accounts before you start making withdrawals. And every time you correct a man, even if it's in love, right, you're going to be making some amount of withdrawal. And so you should, on day one, with everybody you meet, be making as many deposits in their emotional bank account as you can. And that really just means criticism of any kind, candor of any kind, constructive feedback of any kind is always, and maybe only, but certainly always going to be better received if it's done from a guy that you love and respect.
Bingo.
Dredd is a guy who I know, without any hesitation, loves me deeply and respects me very much, and vice versa, obviously. And he can say things to me that other men really can't, where I would just look and go, oh, okay, well, yeah, no, I appreciate the feedback, right? And I would basically, and then I would go to Dredd and be like, this guy told me this, and be like, go tell him to pound sand. He would never say that. I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, so he can say things to me that other guys couldn't possibly say, or even if they said the same thing, and even if they were correct, I ain't going to hear it because they haven't made any deposits in my emotional bank account. I don't have the same kind of love and respect for them as I have for him, and that he has for me. I know without any hesitation, and I mean none, that Dave Redding has my best interest at heart almost all the time. Like I can't even think, and I shouldn't even probably qualify it with an almost. Like I can't think of a time or place when he wouldn't. If I called him and needed him, or if we were in any kind of situation. And so therefore he has much better opportunity and ability to lead me than a guy who, and this happened last week, actually, a guy who sent me an incredibly long series of Slack messages telling me things that I should be doing and how I can probably improve my leadership and all that kind of stuff. To which I said, man, this is very insightful. I appreciate you keeping your eyes on me and trying to keep me straight out there, man. I really appreciate that. And I'll never respond to it. Right. Yeah. I have nothing else to say because there's nothing to say to something like that. Right.
You might have a point and I'll consider it.
Yeah, exactly. I'll consider it.
If you can sincerely thank a guy for taking the time to give you feedback.
And I don't usually say I'll consider it because I may not, but I usually say like, man, I really appreciate you keeping eyes on things. Without guys like you to keep me in the guardrails, keep me out of the ditch, I could fall in. And that's true. Mm-hmm. That's true. So there's that piece. And then the other piece that I think is useful, and this is scriptural, where there's a scripture and Dredd will love this, in the Doctrine and Covenants, Dredd. But essentially no power or influence can or ought to be maintained by the virtue of authority. And there's other places where it says this as well in scripture, and you can only lead a man, and really candor is just leading, right? Mm-hmm. It's giving feedback and trying to get a guy to a place of advantage because you're trying to help him improve. So only by persuasion, by long suffering, by gentleness and meekness, by love unfeigned, kindness, pure knowledge, all those kinds of things. And then in the next verse it says, reproving, so given that feedback, candor, sometimes with sharpness, when moved upon by the Holy Ghost, and then, and I think this is important, showing forth afterwards an increase of love toward him who you've spoken to, in case he would think for a second that you might be his enemy, right? And because you can't have that. So even after the AAR comes, I do think another important principle is to make sure you throw your arm around that guy and help him understand, make sure he understands, right? Some guys don't need it, right? Yeah. It's different, and you got to kind of read the room, and that's leadership, right? But I think it's important to recognize too that, like, you got to come at it gently. You don't have to be wimpy about it, but you got to, you can't be like, you suck, right? And you just tell the guy, like, you can be strong, you can be assertive, but it has to be from love. And I think it has to be, it can't be fake love. It can't be like, listen, sure care about you. Yeah. So gonna, right? That's terrible.
Nobody give you some feedback.
Right.
That might be a fifth principle would be it must be from love. And love is selfless concern for the welfare of others. Yeah. So it must be from that. And because a lot of mistakes can, I had a guy give me an AAR once, and I just was like, that is the craziest thing I've ever heard. But because I know the guy loved me and I respect him, I went and asked my shield lock, and they said, and I even asked some guys that were present during the event that we're talking about, and they said, not seeing that at all. But I loved and respected the guy, so my assumption is that that's his observation. It's incorrect, as it turns out, but he wasn't doing it to hurt me. And he just, whatever he was seeing wasn't there. According to everybody else I talked to, if I didn't love and respect him, I probably wouldn't have asked anybody else. I would have just thought, he's off base, or is trying to bring me down for his own reasons, which, as a leader, there's going to be times where people cannot help. And there's going to be a certain kind of guy that cannot help but try to topple you. You just can't help it. Closely related, though not quite the same thing, is the kind of guy, he's not trying to topple you per se, but he wants to know that you're worth following. So he's kind of calling your bluff. He's pushing you a little bit to see, are you really all that?
Mm-hmm. Which kind of goes along with the other C of consistency, right?
Yeah, right. But or commitment.
Or commitment.
Maybe all five. Or maybe all five. I don't know.
Maybe so. Yeah.
Right.
Funny how they overlap, right?
Well, so one of the funny things, we were exchanging a text about some funny, like, AI automated captions, right? And it was Dredd saying sad clown syndrome, but AI called it the Zag clan. And I get laughing about it now. But initially
the Zag clan. Those guys.
The Zag.
They're like the Wu-Tang. They're kind of like the Wu-Tang clan, but they're not nearly as dangerous.
Right. I feel prayers for those folks. But I was, my initial sort of response was like, oh no, I made a mistake. And I think, Helmet, you were just trying to be, it was funny, right?
Oh, I just thought it was hilarious.
And so in my mind, I'm like, well, man, something that sort of tells me is I'm not in enough conversations where feedback is the norm. If I get defensive so easily about something that was actually really funny. And so I wasn't necessarily offended, but it just sort of made me sort of double check, like, man, are my relationships the kind where I'm getting enough feedback, but I don't know.
So that's an interesting thought. And I'll tell you, as a guy whose jester is kind of in the family of need for approval, mm-hmm. right? Even though I just thought I was doing something funny, I just thought you would laugh and be like, yeah, you gotta, we got to keep the Zag clan in order. You can't, can't let those guys get out of order. Right.
Yeah.
Right. I thought, but I can definitely see where it could have been seen as a like backhanded way of criticizing.
Right.
Or trying to give feedback, but not really directly. And that I think is probably comes a lot from our corporate lives. Because in my, maybe it's different in your company, but in my company, candor is not practiced.
Right.
I'm working very hard as the culture guy to try and get people to stop having the conversation outside the conversation, because that's like anti-candor. Right. Like, oh yeah, we had this conversation. Then they come over here and they talk to this guy and it's different. And they talk to this guy and it's different. And you're like, you got to stop doing that. Like either you're unified or you're not, whatever. But, so I can definitely see how you would, how that could be perceived that way. And that's one of the things I love about F3. In fact, part of the reason I do that is because it was taught to me, and it's heaped upon me in many ways. Right. But I will say, and I've told my wife this too, some of the things that Dredd in particular, or Slaughter or other guys, just other guys, even some of the things that they pick on me about, it's kind of like when you get your F3 name.
Yeah.
Dredd explained to me how you name a guy, right? And you're like, you name a guy with a big nose schnoz, right? Or you name a guy with the big ears Dumbo, so that he recognizes and realizes like, it doesn't matter. Like it's stupid. Like, how could that possibly matter among adult men? Right. And in a similar way, it's like, sometimes we point out and pick on like really obvious, stupid things about each other so that we become a little more emotionally durable, so that you don't worry about the fact that it says Zag Clan. By the way, anybody watching on YouTube and reading that closely, I would love for them to call, because I have a list of hobbies that I think they should probably engage in before they start worrying about that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But so I thought it was Zag Clan, funny.
They could help the Zag Clan.
They should start the Zag Clan.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it actually exists.
Well, and I think to your point, right? How do we help each other become more emotionally durable? And I don't know. I guess my question would be, I haven't necessarily seen locally the AAR, I'll say implemented, but is that something you do after a VQ? Is that like, how do we get it in there?
There are some guys, some regions who do it literally every time, every workout.
Okay.
They hold one after every workout. That is just part of their.
Do it periodically to try to get guys to pick up the habit, and it generally does not catch on. And maybe because we've been doing it for so long, but so I mean, I think a site Q has to commit to it.
Yeah,
I think the site Q has to commit to it. And I think the site Q, if you're serious about it, after every workout needs to step up and say.
It really ought to be his responsibility, right?
Yeah, would say, I think the categories we would use were the commands or the calls clear and consistent? Did he use the proper calls? Number one. Number two, did he place himself within the packs, wherever the packs were, so that everyone could hear him? That's an important thing, right? Number three, did he challenge everyone from the 12 to the 6 as best he could? And that'd be three categories. Somebody might throw safety in there, and I'm not saying you shouldn't. Whatever it is, but I think that that's part of what a site Q should do. The other thing about metros, because we've been around so long, is it happens throughout the workout anyway.
Just it's pretty rough. Real time.
Yeah. So
I wouldn't really call it candor with love, however.
Right. It's not like we're all standing there looking at each other going, it's like 12 seconds into it. Cindy's like, dude, so Cindy would say, he'd call this one guy, Joe Biden, because he would kind of trail off. He's like, first extra. He's like, hey, Joe Biden.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. Yeah. And then the guy, of course, in the COT is introducing himself as Joe Biden. I mean, because that's
right. Was that his nickname?
Again,
it's men.
No, his nickname was something else. But the point is, and it's funny because
he's calling himself that.
But he's calling himself that. Like it's in a similar way. Even just showing up at the workout, right? And I would come, and especially when I very first thought, I can handle going to Metro. I can do that, right? Yeah, no problem, right? And I would get up there, And these guys, they run your face off. I can keep up now, but I surely couldn't back then. And I still don't go to some of them because I can't keep up, because these guys run, sub 7 miles, and, they'll hit 4 miles in a 45-minute workout and do all these reps and stuff. I mean, they're monsters. Yeah. I'm not there. But I would come and I would, and it's funny because I remember one time I ran, and Dredd, you'll appreciate this. I want to say it was like a 6 at 6 or something like that, right? And I can't remember what idiot convinced me. It was probably Gitmo, probably convinced me to go. And I was like, I don't think it's a good idea. And he's like, no, you'll be fine. And I ran, and I come back, and and this is truth, I was probably 10 minutes after. I mean, these guys, blew it out, and I got lost and all kinds of stuff. It was terrible because of course they didn't stick around for me, right? But when I finally got back to the flag, the only 2 guys waiting were Cindy and Swamp Fox.
See?
And
two of the biggest fat flippers.
And they're ruthless. And you know what they did when I got there? Swamp Fox goes, how heavy are those shoes? What the heck are you even running on? Why are you so late? And Cindy was like, we've got to get you like a scooter or something when you come to these, something like that. Right. Yeah. And I get it. Right. And so I go to COT with just the 3 of us. And I was like, Frank Schwartz, whatever I was then, 42 or whatever, right. And I changed my name for Metro workouts for a little while there. Mama told me not to come. Right. That was my name at a Metro workout for a long time, because did they give me crap? Sure. But I knew, and I still know, and I know that he would deny this. I know he does listen to these. So I'm telling him, so I'm sure I'll get a text after this one. Right. But I know that Cindy loves me. I know that, even though he abuses me mercilessly. Yeah. Right. But I know he cares. He legitimately cares.
He believes that's what you need.
It is. No, I think you're right. And he's not wrong, right? It definitely motivates me, right? So he does that. But again, if I was just Joe Blow, and he was doing that, and he hadn't made deposits in my emotional bank account, if I didn't know that he loved me, he couldn't do that. I'd be like a lot of guys who go to Metro. I'd cry and go home and never come back.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool to me, because one of the things that I have struggled with is sort of like, what does male friendship look like? And I'm, as a guy who's in program and checklist recovery, right? I want them so bad to be like, these are the 5 things to be a good male friend. And I think what F3 teaches me, at least, is like, it's just be yourself, right? And like, let other guys be themselves, and realize some guys just like to give you crap. And, it's really, I struggled when I stopped using. I really struggled with like, well, how do I have fun if it doesn't involve drugs and alcohol? And really, from the guys that I work out with, I've learned to have fun just doing burpees or running around, and so I don't know. I think there's just this really, really cool thing that we do there. I sort of curious your thoughts on, so like within a workout context, right? We can give guys feedback there. Where else? And maybe it's not a formal after action report, but have you seen other ways to embed like this regularity of hard truths or feedback within, I don't know if it's like different relationships in your Concentrica, or just ways to make that more consistent so that it's not so foreign when those disagreements do come up?
I think it starts internally. I do it every morning when I pray, and I walk through my Concentrica, and I say, did I love, honor, protect my wife? And I asked God to tell me, I'm asking God's, was I sacrificial father to my children? And things bubble up. And I said, okay, and with that, when I'm doing that, I just do sat and unsat, satisfactory and unsatisfactory. I was or I wasn't. With my shield lock, was I a good friend? With my blades, was I a good mentor, sat or unsat? And it might be something like a guy texted me and I didn't stop and respond to him. Well, that's my Concentric. I'm supposed to do that, right? And then through Mammon, I just say sat or unsat, sat or unsat. So that's where it starts with me as a personal habit. Is the primary source of accountability for me is going to be God, and hopefully no one else would tell me something that would be less direct and true than what God already told me. When I did my own AAR, So when I turned to, let's say somebody I work with, somebody's there with, I said, where do you think I could have improved that, hearing or whatever? It's funny, I had a guy do this yesterday and told me I was in federal court and I made a particular motion. I used the state court language for it. Why there's different language doesn't really matter, but I'm in state court much more often than federal court. And so I made a motion in state court language. He goes, yeah, I could tell the judge was kind of making faces when you did that. And I didn't notice that. And at first when he said it, I was kind of miffed about that. And then because I didn't even think he was right. And I said, hang on a second. I looked it up. Sure enough, he was right. I was using the wrong. And I said, I'm really glad he told me that. I'm really glad he told me that. And that is, I would call that more of a hasty rather than a deliberate AAR. So a deliberate AR for me is the thing in the morning, and then certain events I'm going to have an AAR because they're built into the program, whatever. But you should be doing it all the time. I mean, this trial we were talking about was weeks ago. It just happened to be that we were driving back from court yesterday together, and he brought it up. So it should be something that happens constantly. It really needs to be baked into what you do in the same way that today I was sitting in Poppy's doing a Whetstone, and out of the corner of my eye, my dad vision saw a little girl getting ready to fall down. She's leaning against, and I was in motion, instinctively ran over there, and Dad turned around. We got her squared away. She wasn't hurt. And I sat back down, and of course I'm with my blade, who's got 3 almost grown kids, sitting next to these 4 old guys. Dark, you've seen those guys, right?
They are the quadtaverate. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're there every morning.
Octogenarian guys are every morning. And it's so funny when I'm whetstoning a guy, I'm in this little, and he's got to sit next to me, and they will every once in a while just pitch in. So here we're having this conversation. In fact, today we're talking about the Catholic church, about my Stone was around Blaze, a Catholic guy, and he's talking about switching churches. And one of the old guys leans over. He's like, I was an altar boy at that church.
Just a little color commentary.
Awesome. So the point of that story is kind of the dad, that dad vision we all have, that it gets implanted in our brains like Matrix style when you have your first kid, where, you see a blur, you stick your hand out, you catch a kid, might be your kid, might not be. AR needs to be in the same way, is asking for feedback, and it should be automatic. It should be just baked in, something you do as it's part of your nature, and you can make it that way by constantly doing that.
Yeah, and not obnoxiously, because I think there are times when I've gotten obnoxious in the past where I'm like, well, was that okay? Was that okay? And that's different. That's different, right? Don't think that is
closely related to the self-effacing parenthetical.
The self-effacer. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
You're saying,
yeah,
hey,
because it's not seeking feedback, it's seeking approval, and there's a difference, right?
Yeah, and it's the look on your face. So so we had a hearing yesterday. It was very long. Get in the vehicle. What'd you think, man? Tell me where I was good and where I was bad. And he was telling me, but I was like, hey, man, did that land? What's he going to say? He's going to say yes. Yeah, he's going to say, hey, man, because he's sick. He knows
he can see me like, don't hurt me. Yeah.
I'm not looking for rope. I'm looking for yarn. And that, if you do that, you're not going to get anything of value.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And if you do it enough, you'll never hear the truth. Yeah. If you do it, you cried wolf too many times, right? And so what I was going to say is not only to make it a regular thing, I was just going to add one piece of that, and that is for my wife and I, because we do this, right? We give each other feedback. I don't know if, well, I don't say I know it's not. It is not the same way I would give you feedback, Plague. There ain't no chance, right? And I would not receive it, right? So it's very different. But we have these discussions about like, hey, where do you need to see me more? What else can I, that kind of stuff, right? But so yes, periodic is super important. But I also think without shared mission, it also becomes much more difficult. So if a guy doesn't understand exactly what he was supposed to have been doing, right? In terms of accomplishing a mission or accomplishing a task or something like that, it makes it much more difficult to give him feedback about it. You can't get mad at a guy for doing something that you didn't tell him he couldn't do.
Now you've just hit on principle number 6.
I'm trying real hard to get you through all of them.
Which I'm going to name backfeed, because as a leader, when you're doing this, the guy may well raise something that is back on you. So as Dark intimated there, if you say, well, tell me why you did this, you did this and you're supposed to be doing that. And he said, I didn't know I was supposed to be doing that. I didn't understand the mission. What do you think the mission was? That's what, and he misstates it. And you're like, that's on me. So sometimes it'll come back on you, and that's backfeed. That's principle number 6. Be receptive, open.
You writing these down?
And ready to acknowledge backfeed. Because that's quite likely to happen, right?
Well, I will say that sometimes, like especially when I had employees that work for me. I don't have anybody who reports to me right now, but back when I had employees, especially, many times, if not every time, but many times when I would meet with them one-to-one or even in a meeting, I would, like, if something didn't go quite right or whatever, I often would start by saying, hey guys, here's what I think happened. Here's what I thought I said. Help me understand where, where did I miss it?
Yeah.
And sometimes we're like, no, we understood it and we're sorry, or they would be like, oh, well, no, we understood that as this. And then I go, okay, good. Now let's program that out of my language, or let's program that out of our progress or our process so that I don't screw that up again. Right. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting as you're talking through this, I have found myself in that approval seeking sort of phase where I'm like constantly asking for, how was that? How was that? And I had a really good leader one time that finally just said, like, do you really want to know? Or like, what are you hoping to hear? Right. And ultimately, like, that was really helpful. But I think even that moment, right, I could have gone on forever continually. It's like, I don't need to check in after every meeting and every project and every single thing to say, but that was sort of a precursor to some of my substance abuse, but was just really just so thirsty for somebody else to say you're doing a good job, and that I wasn't getting any feedback, right? Because it's sort of exhausting for people to be in that sort of space.
You've got to find when you're the leader, you've got to find and if it's your SLT or whatever it is, or your shield lock, in the same way you direct all of your sexual energy and interest to your M, you need to find guys with whom you direct your need for affirmation.
Yeah.
Which is, to me, is different than feedback, right? And you need to go to those guys and ask them specifically for affirmation. I don't think it's wrong to do that. And I think it will keep you from seeking affirmation outside of your concentrica, or even within your concentrica in places where you should not seek it.
It could be potentially super unhelpful.
Absolutely unhelpful.
And I'll tell you, I don't know if this is exactly where you're going, Dredd, but that's the office romance, right?
I wasn't where I was going, but that's a
good example of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I'm not getting enough attaboys at home.
Right.
But Julia down the hall, not only does she, wear that wool skirt okay, right? She's also giving me affirmations. And I think, that's, kind of talking back to when I said making deposits in the emotional bank account. I also think for me anyway, an important piece of that I found for guys that I work with, an important piece of it is to make sure that I'm always, not always, but that I'm regularly giving positive feedback as well. It's not just corrective feedback. It's making sure they understand when they are doing a good job so that I can reinforce those behaviors. Right. And, Dredd talks about that a lot, but we have to make sure that we're reinforcing those things that we do want, or those times. And I love to say, one of the things I would say a lot too, when I, again, running the business, had employees, was, hey, you really surprised me when you did this. I wasn't expecting you to do that so well, or I wasn't expecting you to go above and beyond in this way. And I really appreciate, like, so those times when I'd find myself surprised, by performance in whatever way. Right.
Yeah.
So I just think making sure you also have a periodic way of giving positive feedback, not just, corrective feedback.
Yeah. How about, and this is super helpful. I'm curious is there overlap in sort of the approach and skill set when you start thinking about, just like maybe a disagreement, like an issue where, let's say it's the age old discussion about how old a 2.0 should be, or maybe it's
that's the end of the podcast, folks. Thanks for coming. We appreciate you.
or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's a safety thing, or maybe it's one of the things that we've talked through. Like we're telling guys, hey, you decide locally, right? You work with the guys that you're in proximity with and decide.
That's it. That's the number. All right, watch this. Dredd, can we do this? Can we role play really quick?
Yes, please do so.
That'd be great.
Dredd, you're the Nantan. You'll be the Nantan of Fort Chiswell.
Okay. Is my name Schmidlap?
No, my name was going to be Schmidlap. But you know what?
Okay.
I like it better the other way. So
All
you're
right.
Schmidlap, and I will be Jonestown. That's just the first word that popped into my head. So,
all right.
So I Pax of Fort Chiswell come to you, Nantan Schmidlap, and I say, Schmid, how you doing, buddy? Right.
Top drawer.
Hey, we've had a little bit of a question around, like, my 2.0 Johnsontown. That's terrible. You wouldn't name a kid that.
Jonesy. I know Jonesy.
Yeah,
Good.
Jonesy.
Seems like a good kid.
Well, the guys are giving me a lot of crap because I'm trying to show my kid how it is to be a man, and they're giving me crap about bringing my kid to a workout. So, Schmid, I need a ruling here. How young is too young, or how old is, what's the right age?
F3 doesn't have a rule about that.
And I know F3 doesn't, but I'm asking you, Schmitty.
Well, we don't have one locally. Why would you want one?
Well, because then I wouldn't have to, I think that him coming at 15, it's fine. It's fine. But they're saying stuff like, oh, well, but I'm worried about being vulnerable in a COT next to a 15-year-old kid. And I'm like, look, you guys know Jonesy. He can handle it. He's a mature kid. He's sharp. He keeps up with the workouts. I just don't understand why guys are getting so worked up about this.
Would you say it's the majority of the guys that oppose Jonesy coming out to the workout?
That's a good question. I don't know if it's a majority, but it's enough guys that are all up in my business about it, and they're starting to get other guys to make, have the question about it. And I just, I feel like I want to keep bringing them, and I just think we just need a ruling on this.
Are there any other guys that any of the guys who are complaining to you, are they guys that you respect? You think they're being honest with you?
That's a good question. Some of those guys are the guys that are like, everything's a problem all the time, no matter what, and they're just looking for something to complain about. I get that. But some of them, I don't know. There's a couple guys that I get what they're saying. I just don't agree, but I respect them. I hear what they're saying as far as like, hey, it's becoming a hindrance because some guys don't feel comfortable, but I think those guys just need to get comfortable.
Well, I think you kind of have three choices. Choice number one would be to respect the wishes of the guys that are telling you that you respect by not bringing Jonesy out until he's a little bit older. That's choice number one. That's course of action number one. Course of action number two would be that you start a new workout and you announce beforehand and say, look, it's going to be a little different. It's not going to be F3 dads like that. It's going to be full bore, but it's going to be open to, let's say, teenage boys, or so that way guys know, there's an option, and the COTs are going to have kids in them. So it might be a little different. That'd be option two. Option number three is you just keep doing what you're doing. And F3's open all men, Jonesy's a man, but it's not mandatory, meaning some of the guys that are uncomfortable, they're not going to come anymore. Probably. Those are your three options. there is no option 4 that I make a rule that there's going to be a minimum age, and the minimum age is low enough to accommodate Jonesy. I'm not going to do that. That would be,
why not?
It's antithetical to F3 leadership principles. So you have a site Q. He can make a rule. I'm not going to do it. But I'll be honest with you, if your site Q asked me whether he should, I tell him, I don't think you should. And if he says, what should I tell Jonestown? I'd say, he's got 3 options. That's what I would tell your site Q. And obviously, we want you to keep doing F3. I think it'd be a great thing for you to have another workout if you want to do that. That's kind of the remedy most of the time. Hate to see you stop coming, but I also hate to see you run off other guys. So it's kind of a leadership dilemma that requires a leadership solution.
That's why I'm coming to you. You're the leader. Tell these guys that they're being stupid. No, fine. I quit F3. I'm never coming back.
Okay, that's not a leadership solution,
right? Yeah,
and that's actually
scene.
That's really a realistic thing. Is a guy who doesn't want the freedom of his own agency. He doesn't want to lead. He seeks authority. Yeah. So it's that kind of guy really is never going to be happy in F3, because this teenage boy situation is actually good for us, because it keeps coming up, because it provides an opportunity to the packs on the ground to do what leaders and men have to do, which is to identify a problem, a conflict, and resolve it in a mature and leaderly fashion. And I kind of like it when it comes up, because then they're forced to do it. But if we, as centralized leaders, decide for them, then we just take it off the shelf. We remove the opportunity from them, which is bad leadership.
I would say this Nantan, somebody else might do something different. This Nantan, not only will I never, ever, ever, whoever listens to these and still has this question later in Slack, I'm going to refer you back to this episode, because I'm about to do another scenario here in a second too that I think you'll love. But this Nantan will never, ever, 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 under any circumstances, ever make a rule about anything even vaguely like that. And I'm a believer that the only thing that you accomplish by making a rule is to give you an opportunity to make more rules, to try and enforce that rule, and so on, ad infinitum, until you're the biggest bullfrog that ever lived, right? I think that's the only logical outcome of that kind of thing. If you're unwilling to live by principle, I will say, and the reason for that, the reason those things become bullfrogs and descend into the ultimate toilet bowl of mediocrity, is because you are going against God's plan. God's plan for you as a man is to use your agency for good. That is his plan for you. And anytime you outsource that, or you just completely, dismiss your responsibility to do so, like you just pawn it off somewhere, or you just, you pull a full rush, and if you choose not to decide, you still have made a choice, right? Mm-hmm. Even if that's the case, right? Free will, then that's not the song. But it could be, but it's not. But anytime you do that, since you are thwarting it, you're destined to fail. There's no other option. You will fail doing it that way. There's no question about it, right? So you can't just you can't have a rule, because then it just becomes an enforcement, avalanche. And you can't, again, I don't know how to say it, you cannot outsource your agency to another person without setting yourself up for all but guaranteed long-term failure. Yeah. I really believe that to my absolute core. Now that we've done Nantan packs, in the next episode, I'm Jonestown coming to Schmidlap, and Schmidlap is bringing his kid. Yeah. And I'm going to Schmidlap saying, hey man, stop bringing your freaking kid. Right? That's the next scenario we'll dive into.
Yeah, I love the idea.
Tune in next time for scenario 2, right, where you'll hear a dark helmet say, I am Schmidlap.
I am Schmidlap.
Hey, big man, let me hold $1.
Maybe some of the scenario stuff is because there's not a checklist, right? But we can certainly model for guys. Hey, here's how this might go, and here's a way, to add to the framework, and I love it because
we can deconstruct it a little.
Yeah,
help you understand the ultimately what's going on.
We're just all trying to figure out, like, how many roads must a man walk down before you can call him a man, or how many beatdowns must a man show up to before you call him a man? And the answer, my friend, is
might be
in the wind.
Might be
blowing in the wind.
That's
Bob Dylan, not Bob Villain. I want to point out.
It's a very important distinction to make
it's
right
very
now.
Important. Because Bob Dylan's allowed in America, but Bob Villain, at least now, is not.
He's on his way
in
out.
America. He's on his way out.
Bob Villain he's leading the Zag Clown, Zag Clan.
The Zag Clan.
The Zag Clans in Glastonbury, England. Don't you know?
All right, fellas, appreciate you guys. Have a good day.
All right, boys.
See you guys.
Stone on steel in the darkest spots. Warning weather, still it cries. Whetstone whispers through my mind. Scream that song, make the edge come alive. Cut through the noise just to survive. Feel the rhythm, feel the bite. Whetstone screaming in the night. Hands on fire, pushing through the grind. Sweat and sparks leave the past behind. Sharp and ready for the fight ahead. Whetstone house till the hunger's fed.